where the death sentence of 8 former Indian Navy men has been commuted by the Court of Appeal. The sentences have now been reduced in the Dahra Global Case. The detailed judgment is still awaited. New Delhi says the government is in contact with the legal team as well as family members of 8 Indian sailors. The government says it will continue to extend legal and consular help to the sailors in question. The government had received consular access to all 8 men on death row in the Gulf state of Qatar. In October, a Qatar court had sentenced the Indian citizens to death on charges of espionage. India had called the death sentence deeply shocking. The Qatari authorities accepted the appeal filed by the Indian government earlier in November. Now, to discuss this case and more, we are now being joined by our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal. Siddhant, thanks for joining us. What can you tell us about this development? The death sentence has been commuted. We know that the Indian government, the foreign ministry, was trying very hard to get more knowledge of this case. 8 Indian sailors accused of espionage. What can you tell us?
Well, it's a big relief for these ex-Indian Navy sailors. Now, essentially, if I can give you a timeline, it was on 26th of October that a Qatari court had announced the death sentence, and today that has been overturned by an appellate court. Essentially, it has been a long legal battle, but also diplomatic and political battle as well in many senses. We saw the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Qatari Emir meeting on 1st of December on the sidelines of the Dubai Climate Change Summit, and then thereafter we saw the consular access being given to the Indian ambassador Vipul to these ex-Indian sailors. So the trends were positive, but essentially today the big relief came. So what next? 2 things. One, of course, is a treaty of sentence, according to which if the remaining sentence or any sentence needs to be fulfilled, according to this treaty between India and Qatar, these sailors, ex-Indian Navy sailors, can come to India and serve that, or there can be a pardoning by the Qatari Emir. That usually happens during Ramzan or on 18th of December. That's the Qatari National Day.
Right. Siddhant, help us understand more about what role the Indian government, specifically Prime Minister Modi, may have played in this news development. We understand there was a meeting between the Indian Prime Minister and the Emir of Qatar.
Well, yes, you correctly said that there was a meeting. This was an informal conversation on the sidelines of the climate summit. We saw the picture as well, and a very brief statement. In fact, it was a post on X, formerly Twitter, with the Prime Minister and the Qatari Emir meeting, and it said that basically the welfare of Indians in Qatar was discussed. It did not mention this specific case, but it looks like some kind of political talks did help in the entire case, even though the case was largely, in fact, all the entire case was in the courts. It went from lower court to the higher court, and of course the Ministry of External Affairs here in Delhi played a key role, especially with the legal aid it provided and the funding for it.
Siddhant, thank you so much for all those updates, and thanks for joining us at this hour. And to understand better what's actually happening when this case is involved, to give us more perspective on the developments, we're also being joined by Suresh K. Goel, who's a former Indian diplomat. Thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador Goel.
Good evening.
Right, good evening. Sir, help us understand what's actually happening when this case is concerned. This is a big news development. The death sentence has been commuted. What more can you tell us?
See, the fact is that, first of all, whenever there is an Indian, and I'm just giving a bit of a background here, that in case of all Indians who are implicated in any kind of criminal cases abroad, Indian embassies are expected to provide consular assistance, including assistance in terms of fighting the case in the court. And therefore, it can be safely assumed that even earlier when the case was being fought in the lower court, where they were actually sentenced to death, that consular assistance must have been provided. But as the fact that despite everything, these 8 sailors were given death sentence would demonstrate the seriousness of the case, and the details of the case were not shared by the Qatari government with even the embassy, which would demonstrate that it was quite a serious case really. And therefore, now after the death sentence had been awarded in October, to have a turnaround of this kind where it has been commuted to life is a huge relief as well as achievement for the Indian diplomacy and the Indian leadership, I would say, really, because this kind of a condoning commutation is not very common, even though Qatar does not, as a matter of practice, award death sentence very often. But once it has been awarded, to commute it so quickly is an achievement.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, this is clearly a grave case, the fact that Qatar actually gave the death sentence. Do you think the Indian leadership, specifically Prime Minister Modi, played a role in getting the death sentence commuted? As we are given to understand, there was a meeting between Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Emir of Qatar.
I'm sure that, in fact, I'm quite confident that that meeting was very useful in changing or basically softening the mind of the leadership in Qatar and try and see if the death sentence could be commuted. I'm also told by my friends in Qatar that normally, given the importance of the relationship between India and Qatar, and also given the fact that Prime Minister could get directly with the Qatar Sheikh, it was very, very likely that this commutation would have been done, but it had to be confirmed in a court of appeal. And therefore, having taken it up with the Sheikh and our ambassador in Qatar having followed it up so diligently with the bureaucracy and with the courts, finally to have the declaration, have the verdict of commuting is quite an achievement. And yes, I think we can rejoice in the fact that it has been announced.
Absolutely. Ambassador, thank you so much for all your insights and thanks for joining us on WION World is One. WION World is One is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.